Welcome to Passport to Wealth, the podcast for U.S. expats ready to take charge of their finances while living abroad. I'm your host, Arielle Tucker, a certified financial planner, enrolled agent, and fellow expat, here to help you navigate the complexities of cross-border life with clarity and confidence. Welcome back to Passport to Wealth. Today, we're joined by Brandon Mitchener. Brandon is the Executive Director of Tax Fairness for Americans Abroad, where he leads the campaign to end citizenship-based taxation and financial discrimination against Americans living overseas. A Brussels-based journalist and strategic communications consultant, Brandon leverages years of expertise helping organizations, businesses, and individuals navigate complex political and regulatory landscapes. Born and raised in Michigan and Indiana, Brandon has spent over 3 decades in Europe. He holds American, French, and Belgian citizenship and is fluent in English, German, French, and Italian. I love that you're collecting passports and languages. Very, very impressive. In addition to his professional work, Brandon is a certified sommelier, runs a successful wine tasting business in Brussels, and is a frequent commentator on U.S. elections and politics in Belgian media. Driven by his personal experience and costly discriminatory U.S. tax obligations while living abroad, Brandon is a passionate advocate for residence-based taxation reform. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I'm so curious, how did you end up moving to Europe 3 decades ago? Did you move directly to Belgium, or what was your journey to
No,
where
my,
you are
my, my
today?
first step was actually Germany, and it happened almost entirely by chance, which is a theme that I think would be great for people in Washington to understand. Sometimes life just happens. I started learning German in high school. I decided to study German in college purely because I was good at it and enjoyed it. Then I studied journalism, and with the combination of German and journalism, my very first job was being hired by Dow Jones and being sent to Germany to cover German unification, which was a journalist's dream. And then in between, life happened. I got married. I had kids. I changed jobs a few times and eventually ended up working for the Wall Street Journal, which sent me to Brussels to cover the European Union. So now I've been in Europe for more than 35 years, between Belgium, Germany, and bits of Austria, Switzerland, and Italy.
Oh, wow. Okay, you've really covered everywhere in Europe. Very cool. And you've obviously had these amazing work opportunities living in Europe. Is that really what made you stay versus just kind of going on assignment and being and traveling in Europe? What actually made you want to stay in Europe?
Well, I'm interested in languages, as you mentioned before. So I speak German, French, Italian, and understand a bit of Spanish and other things. And I'm learning Greek. And it's at one point that became my expertise. As a young American in Europe, it would have been easier for me to move back. But after I'd stayed in Europe, it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling not a prophecy, but a reality that you're good at working in Europe. The longer you stay, the better you become at it. Like you as well, I think. I love living in Europe. I love what I do, which is now helping companies better understand Europe, better communicate with the European media, with social media, websites, things like this, and the wine tastings. I've got a lot of things going on here, some of which would be transferable to the United States, but most of which really kind of require me to be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that in my own career as well. There was a time that we actually went back to the U.S. for a few years, and it was really hard for me to kind of translate my experience that was so valuable here.
Mm.
But doing that in the U.S., it didn't have the same value. And so we see that with a lot of the individuals that we talk to, right? You
Mm.
just kind of become this weird European American hybrid mix that's
Yeah.
very, very valuable in the right place.
Yeah.
Um, I want to jump over into kind of this concept that we as Americans abroad face with citizenship-based taxation. I could explain that, but I'm actually going to ask you to explain citizenship-based taxation, and then talk about why you believe the residence-based taxation would make more sense.
Okay. Well, the United States, almost unique in the world, the other exception being Eritrea, a dictatorship along the Red Sea. taxes its citizens, or requires its citizens to declare their income, rather, on a worldwide basis. That means even if you live in another country, you have to pay taxes in that country and also to the United States. This is the basis of citizenship-based taxation, and it's a Civil War era law that really has outlived its usefulness and outlived its justification. And we're pushing hard for that to be changed because it's just fundamentally unfair. It's bad enough to have to be subject to the tax system of one country. I mean, everyone frets over tax declarations and having to declare bank accounts. But to have to do that for two countries or sometimes even more countries would be an absolute nightmare. And I often give the example, you said I was collecting passports. It's also by accident. So I was born American. I became French by marriage because my ex-wife was French-Italian. And I became Belgian by choice after living here for 25 years. So I've never paid taxes in France because I've never lived in France, and the French don't ask me to pay taxes. But I still pay taxes in the United States, where I haven't lived for more than 35 years and I have no income. So it's a bit absurd that I'm still paying taxes to a country that I haven't lived in for 35 years and where I have no source of income. And that's the fundamental unfairness of citizenship-based taxation. This puts me at a competitive disadvantage to any other small businessman in Europe because my neighbor doesn't have to pay, all these extra fees to deal with two different tax systems, and competitors in a business sense don't have to do that either. So it's fundamentally unfair and discriminatory, and that's even before you run into problems and get socked with gigantic penalties, even if it's inadvertent mistakes that you've made.
Yeah, you talk a little bit about the competitive advantage, but I know that, myself and every American that I've ever talked to living abroad, you can't walk into a bank and open up an account like your neighbor
Mm.
can, right? Who's a non-US person. You don't have access to the same investments, the same retirement accounts. And even if you don't make a lot of money, I mean, I talk to a lot of people who are really excited. They just saved their first, 10,000 euros or 50,000 euros. They're basically no one is going to work with them on the US side because from a compliance standpoint, there's no money to be had when you're working with really small accounts.
Yeah.
And the local banks won't take them because they have a US passport. And so then they're really just kind of forced to like sit in cash. And so it's this huge inequality that we face where if you are the top 5%, the top 1%, you can pay to navigate it. But really what I'm seeing is the burden to individuals who are just trying to build a life, go to school in a different country and have a little barista job, or get their first job, or they fall in love and now they're living on a farm in Germany, right? They're not trying to avoid taxes. They're just trying to build a life, and they really are end up wearing, handcuffs and being able to do that. I
Yeah.
also see women often very harmed in these situations, because oftentimes I find that foreign men are culturally, especially Europeans, they're very scared of the IRS, and so they just say, "Okay, I'm going to hold all the money. You don't get to hold any money because you're a U.S. person, and our bank isn't allowing your name to be on this account. Our brokerage isn't allowing you, so I'm going to hold all the money."
Yeah.
And that's fine and great when everything's going fine and great. If fine and great doesn't happen, I am dealing with a lot of cases where women are coming to me, they're 40, 50, 60, and they've been completely blocked out. They have no access to money, and that's a very, very scary situation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just one of the consequences of the citizenship-based taxation. You didn't mention by name, but FATCA and FBAR forms create a compliance obligation, not only for the American citizen abroad, but also for any financial institution that wants to deal with us. And many of them, as you mentioned, just take the easy way out and say, no Americans want it. And I've had friends who have been debanked. I've been denied investment opportunities in Europe, and there are many, many more people like us. And I've also heard the stories of people in a divorce situation where the partner has all the money, and that's not a place that you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is again, you can go through the court system to straighten all that out. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money to go through that. So just
Yeah.
kind of
Mm.
flagging that, I don't think it's talked about enough.
Mm.
You know, Going back to this concept of residence based taxation, that's really the treatment of every other country besides Eritrea and the United States. I mean, what can the US learn from the fact that every other country is operating on this concept of residence based taxation?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the US often likes to think of itself as being exceptional and, we know best. But here's a case, I think, where they don't know best. And if you appeal to common sense, which is what I've tried to do, then it is the obvious way forward. With residence-based taxation, I live in Belgium. If I leave the country and move to France tomorrow, all I have to do is go to the local government office saying, I'm leaving. I fill out a form saying I'm deregistering from Belgium. When I arrive in France, I register with the local government there. And, without any further ado, I become a tax resident of France and Belgium stops hounding me for taxes. And that's the way it ought to be for the United States. You leave the country, you fill out a form that says I'm leaving the country for tax purposes. Well, just tax consequences, I guess. And then when you arrive in a new country, start paying taxes there. The IRS already deals with this in when people move abroad, they have to split the tax year sometimes and declare, the income from part of the year in one place and part of the year in the other. You've got a transition period. But then after that, you should be scot-free when it comes to an American tax obligation. And again, this is the way it happens in every other civilized democratic country in the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, I guess from your vantage point with your work with the tax fairness group, what is kind of the current pulse among Americans abroad for the push for residence-based taxation? Are you seeing kind of a different shift or a different energy right now on this topic than you've seen in the past? I mean, how is it feeling to you right now?
I think so, and I personally have gotten into this because I sensed the opportunity for change. First, I would say there have been a number of other groups over the years which have pushed the same agenda, trying to replace citizenship-based taxation with residence-based taxation. Some of these organizations are represented indirectly in the members of our board who are active within those organizations. Let's say Republicans overseas, Democrats abroad, the American Association of Residents Overseas, the Accidental Americans, Stop Extraterritorial American Taxation, and others. I mean, the National Taxpayers Union, and they've all been saying these things for years. But I think what our group has managed to do is bring all of these different groups together, especially for the first time ever, Republicans and Democrats at the same table, coming up with a proposal that says, here is how we can fix it. And then so that's one thing, is the right alignment of stars in terms of getting organizations to work together and push in the same direction. The second is President Trump. To his credit, he is the first presidential candidate ever, I think, to talk about double taxation and ending double taxation. And he pledged to end it, quote unquote, once and for all. Those are pretty strong words. And like him or love him, you basically know that he often carries through on his promises. So we remind him of this pledge on a regular basis. And we're reminding the Secretary of the Treasury, reminding the Congress that President Trump has said that this should be a priority for his administration. And given that it enjoys bipartisan support, there's actually no reason that this should sail through Congress as soon as we put a credible bill in front of it.
Yeah, and I'm curious because we just had the passage of the one big beautiful bill. Why do you think that this kind of wasn't put into that bill?
We looked into that, and with our advisors in Washington, we learned that the problem with reconciliation bills, and the One Big Beautiful Bill was considered a reconciliation bill to extend existing tax cuts and the like, is that there are certain traps called the Byrd rules after former Senator Byrd. One of them is that anything involved in a reconciliation bill cannot have an effect on Social Security. I mean, do no harm to Social Security. And anything involving taxation of Americans overseas does have a Social Security effect. for people who are independent. If you own a business overseas, you do pay Social Security in the United States on that income as well. It's part of the double taxation. So if you were to make that go away, it would have an impact on Social Security, and therefore cannot be a part of a reconciliation bill. We explored all kinds of ways of trying to carve out part of our proposal so that the rest of it could be part of reconciliation, but it just didn't make sense. We wanted this from the very beginning to be a bipartisan bill that would tag along or piggyback on some other priority bill in Congress and be enacted without having to make concessions on things like that. And it's a better way forward, because if it had been part of reconciliation, it would have solved fewer problems for fewer people. And as a bill that goes through on a bipartisan basis, it will solve more problems for more people.
And where do you currently stand, or where does a bill currently stand in Congress, or yeah,
Okay.
what's the process? What's the process right now?
So, Representative Darren LaHood, a Republican from Illinois, introduced a bill called the Residence-Based Taxation for Americans Abroad Act at the end of December in the last Congress. According to congressional rules, this needs to be reintroduced in the current Congress. And the reason he hasn't done this yet is he's two things. He's been collecting feedback from people, tax experts primarily, to see whether anything was missed in the original version, if there were some loopholes or tweaks that need to be made in order to prevent abuse. We found some very obscure things having to do with foreign trusts, for example, that might have one American director on the board of a foreign trust, and that needed to be addressed, stuff like that. But overall, it's a very solid bill. And now we have been in a waiting pattern or holding pattern for several months, waiting for the Joint Committee on Taxation, which reviews anything with a revenue impact or a potential revenue impact in Congress, to come back with its assessment of this bill. They're going to say, okay, it's going to cost a lot of money, or it'll save us some money, which is less likely, or it's close to revenue neutral. And then on the basis of this assessment, Representative LaHood will reintroduce the bill with some minor tweaks in order to be as close to revenue neutral as possible. We already have some potential co-sponsors from both parties, Senate and House, lined up. So the ideal constellation would be to reintroduce bills in both houses simultaneously, which are already very aligned from the start, so that we can accelerate the process and possibly even get this to a vote and signature before the end of the year.
Wow, that's really exciting. I didn't realize that you're expecting to go back in this year. So very, very exciting.
I wouldn't be doing this job if I thought this was going to take 10 years. I want to get this.
Yeah.
I'm that kind of guy.
No, I love that. And I told you before we started this call, I got into tax when I first moved abroad. So back in 2011, I was working at PwC. I was actually preparing tax returns, right, for corporate clients.
I used to
And
be back then.
yeah. And I just remember kind of being like starting to understand this and be like, oh my gosh, this is totally insane. Also, I am now subject to this, right? I wasn't making enough money to pay additional tax to the US, but I was having to file a tax return. That was time intensive. That was expensive. As our situation has got even more complicated, even though I work in tax, I still hire professionals, because I have a very complex situation. I think 2 years ago, we filed a German tax return, a Swiss tax return, and a US tax return. And then kind of a lot of additional reporting as well, because I'm a business owner abroad. So it's very complex. And I remember having conversations with our directors and just basically being like, we don't see this changing in your lifetime. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so it's been really exciting to see the work that you guys are doing, and how fast things seem to suddenly be moving. I completely agree with you. I mean, having when candidate president, now President Trump, come out and actually talk about this in October. We talked about that in our podcast after that happened, because I was like, whoa, this is crazy,
Yep.
because this had not been on any presidential candidate's radar. So the fact that someone would even mention that is huge. If I have the data correct, I think that the average US expat pays almost $2,000 a year for
Yep.
filing fees. That's crazy. And so
Yep.
we talk about revenue neutral, but really it's the American expats who are like really bearing the weight. And a lot of those US expats abroad, they don't owe additional tax. These are just paying to file to be compliant with the US government. And they're,
So the whole current system is slowly impoverishing Americans abroad
Mhm.
for no benefit whatsoever, because most of us don't actually owe taxes in the United States. And it's in addition to impoverishing us through, the accumulation of accounting costs over years, it's preventing us from investing for the future and saving for our retirement, because we have to do it in another currency with currency risk that our neighbors next door don't have to deal with. So it's just the injustices just pile on top of one another, and it's I think we've got the alignment of the stars now, with a president who has said that this is a priority, both parties in Congress who have said that this is a priority, and good people on the case to try to make it happen.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go on a side tangent because we talk a lot about currency risk with
Yeah,
our clients.
yeah,
And another thing that President Trump said is he likes a weak dollar,
yeah.
right? And so
That's
we've
not good for
seen
us. That's
we've
terrible for
seen
us.
that, right? And it's not impacting U.S. Individuals living in the U.S. nearly as much as it's impacting us. You live in the euro, I live in the franc.
Yeah,
You're kind of forced to always invest back in dollars, and
yeah.
huge currency risk, when we think about paying back mortgages, right, and doing that in local currency when maybe our savings or we're inheriting wealth in a different currency. It's really difficult for a lot of US
Yeah.
expats.
And things like that really scare me. You understand all of these intricacies far better than most people, and the known unknowns, which terrify people and lead to a lot of anxiety and just general unhappy lives. And as long as the situation lasts, and that's what we're trying to do with all of the testimonials that we collect, is to convince Congress that this is just an unfair, untenable situation. It's an aberration globally, and it's time to put an end.
Yeah, great. What would you say to Americans abroad who are feeling overwhelmed by tax obligations and might not realize kind of there is a movement that is fighting for them right now?
Don't give up hope. I would say that we have a great opportunity now to make this happen. And the reality is that with the work that we've already done, we've got a bill into Congress in less than 6 months. We've got it in the works with the Joint Committee on Taxation. We've got a president who wants to make this happen. Um, Everything is lining up in order for that to happen, possibly even before the end of this year. And I would say what we need now, the next step, and we've been told this by members of Congress, is they need to hear from more Americans abroad. It's one thing if I say it and if you say it, but they need hundreds of people, ideally thousands of people, to be saying this by sharing their stories, their personal stories of how this unfair situation impacts their lives. They need to be writing and calling their members of Congress, asking them to support the Lohood bill the minute that it's reintroduced in Congress, to create some momentum behind it, and that kind of thing. It's typical campaigning, but most Americans overseas are not used to that because we're overseas. The U.S. is a little bit out of sight, out of mind, but we need to make it. We need to put it front and center in order for this to happen.
Yeah, those are great tips, and I tell that to every American that I encounter abroad. It's so easy to bury your head in the sand and say, "This doesn't apply to me." But really, it becomes so powerful when we all work together to elevate our voices to actually make meaningful change and really break those chains of citizenship-based taxation, which is just such an unfair system. So, Brandon, thank you so much for joining me today on Passport to Wealth. I really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise with our audience today.
Ravi.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
The content shared in this podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered financial, tax, or legal advice. We encourage you to consult with a qualified financial advisor, tax professional, or other licensed expert before making any decisions based on the topics discussed. Everyone's financial situation is unique, and personalized guidance from a trusted professional is the best way to ensure your choices align with your individual goals and circumstances.